This band is a great example of how world fame comes after long persistence and hard work. They started out in small clubs and local talent shows, and today they can turn down a Super Bowl performance because they want to. Why are they disliked by critics but adored by millions of listeners around the world? How did a house-to-house preacher with a Bible in hand become a rock star? And how can religion drive you into depression? All this and much more is in today's video about one of today's brightest bands, Imagine Dragons. This is the Enco Stories channel, and we're getting started. In almost any band, there's always one person who stands out. It doesn't matter what the case is, the appearance of the main star, their unique voice, crazy energy, or incredible talent. Someone always shines brighter. Without belittling the talents of other members, we would like to start today's story with the person without whom the band Imagine Dragons would not exist at all. He's in it from the very beginning, he's its founder, and the one who led the band from cramped clubs to large stadiums to a Grammy and world recognition. This man's name is Dan Reynolds, and this story should begin with him. Dan Coulter Reynolds was born on July 14, 1987 in Las Vegas, Nevada. He became the seventh child in the family of Christine and Ronald Reynolds. 2 years later, he had a brother, and another 2 years later, a sister, so the family expanded to 9 people. The family was deeply religious and belonged to the Mormons, namely the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The children grew up deeply religious, attended church every Saturday, and in the future were to engage in missionary activities. Dan's mother, named Christine, was a purposeful woman in her youth, studied well in medical school, received a prestigious presidential scholarship, and could become a doctor. Nevertheless, after meeting her husband, she understood, or was made to understand, that her purpose was raising children. Father, named Ronald, also had a good education, was going to become a teacher, but quickly realized that his income was not enough for such a large family. He entered law school, studied to become a lawyer, and then founded his own law firm. In fact, most of the Reynolds family followed in his footsteps, but not Dan. The boy grew up in a large and friendly family that spent a lot of time together. For example, no matter what the children did during the day, no matter where they spent their time, in the evening everyone gathered at the family table, had dinner, talked, and made plans. As for leisure, the family often got together outside the home. They went hiking, fishing, and attended church together. Education was comprehensive. All the children in the family knew how to play the piano, as the parents believed that it had a good effect on their development. Besides the piano, there was a drum kit, guitars, and amplifiers in the garage of their house. Dan's older brothers had their own bands and often held rehearsals at their house. Dan loved watching his brothers play and quickly developed interest in the drums. The parents did not consider music a serious occupation, it was a hobby at most, but they still saw their son's interest in music and hired him a tutor. It was an experienced local musician who failed to make a career because he was addicted to illegal substances, but could teach anyone to play. Dan was bought an old saxophone at a pawn shop, and he began to learn to play. All free time was occupied by serving the church and learning to play musical instruments. Dan mastered the piano, saxophone, drums, and taught himself how to play the guitar. He really wanted to be like his brothers, but they quickly lost interest and only Dan remained a musician in their family. Most of his brothers followed in his father's footsteps and chose the profession of lawyers. And young Dan looked towards law and dreamed of becoming an FBI agent. The police work fascinated him so much that when he heard the sounds of the police siren, he would get on his bicycle and race after the cops to see them at work. But music, especially at a young age, fascinated him more and more. He picked up good musical taste from his father, who listened to the Beatles and a lot of classic rock. There were posters of Bob Marley and Kurt Cobain in Dan's room. He enjoyed listening to Elton John and Harry Nilsson, and his favorite singers were Billy Joel, U2's Bono, and Paul Simon. Dan started writing his own songs at the age of 12. Computer time was limited to a few hours a week, but it was enough for him to learn how to create music for his lyrics. What did young Dan Reynolds write about? Basically, his first texts were devoted to teenage experiences. At school, he seemed clumsy, unattractive, and lonely. He wore braces, had almost no friends, and music helped him hide from reality in his own world. When I was in high school, I only had one friend, so my teenage years were rough. I had acne, braces on my teeth. I didn't fit in. I hate the word outcast because it's a cliche, but yes, I was an outsider. I was stuck in this state of being a teenager for 15 years. That's why almost all of Imagine Dragons' music is so mean and dramatic. A separate topic was the conflict of faith. The church was present in his life since childhood, and all this time Dan had to live according to strict rules. Of course, he did not always follow them, and this grew into internal anxieties and the feeling that he was living dishonestly. In the lyrics, Reynolds for the first time allowed himself to admit that he did not completely share the religious views of his parents. His texts were about the church and faith, as well as his hatred for school, but they were written allegorically so that no one could understand what the author was talking about. Dan hid his lyrics from his parents, and by his own admission in an interview, he said that he was engaged in music because thanks to it, he could express what he could not say in real life. Despite a rather serious passion for music, Dan did not consider the possibility of a professional career as a musician. His parents supported his passion, but with restraint. It was still just a hobby for them. Older brothers made fun of his clumsy attempts to sing and rough voice, but the tutor always supported him and helped him learn to control his own voice. The result of this work can be heard in the songs of Imagine Dragons.
Got your number all night. I'm always on your team, I got your back all right.
Because of his religious upbringing, Dan had to hide his relationship with a girl in high school. Firstly, because she was Catholic, and secondly, premarital intercourse was strictly forbidden. The dream of becoming an FBI agent did not disappear, and Reynolds was going to enter the private Brigham Young University. This institution belongs to the Mormon Church and is famous for its strict rules. All students must adhere to the Honor Code, which is based on the teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This code includes adherence to the law of academic integrity, personal dignity, standards of dress and appearance. Also, students must obey the laws of chastity, that is, not to engage in any sexual relations before marriage. In addition, they are prohibited from smoking, drinking not only alcoholic substances but also tea and coffee. A month before entering the institution, Dan had a conversation with his mentor to whom he admitted that he had broken one of the rules and had a premarital relationship with a girl for 4 years. Because of this, Reynolds was not allowed to enter the university. I felt even God was looking at me with disgust, even though my heart was saying, "It's okay, you're okay." When all my friends left for college, I sat at home depressed for a whole year. My whole world was shattered. I've been trying to deal with this for over 10 years. When members of the community turned 19, the church sent them around the world on religious missions. All the Reynolds brothers went through it, and he couldn't escape the job either. On the one hand, it was depressing, but on the other hand, it opened up new opportunities. You could learn a new language, see a new country, meet new people. It was not possible to choose the destination. Everything happened by chance. For example, his brothers went to Japan, England, the Philippines, and when it was his turn, Dan was a little disappointed.
For 2 years. And then I opened my mission call, and you read it a line at a time. You like cover up the lines. All my family's in a room, and I'm like, Dan Reynolds, you have been called to serve. And all my brothers are like, Omaha, Nebraska. Everybody was like, oh.
Almost every man who belongs to the church must go through missionary work. Usually, this is 2 years of service, which consists in helping those who need it. Mormons preach the teachings of Jesus Christ, going from house to house, and they also feed the poor and help dependent people. Mission members are limited in their communication with their relatives, although they can call them several times a week and visit them during major holidays. For 2 years, Dan Reynolds wore a badge shirt in Nebraska, returning home only for Christmas and Mother's Day. All this time, he read the Holy Scriptures and talked about them with people. Every day, he knocked on the doors of houses asking, "Can I tell you about Jesus Christ?" And often received a negative response. If that happened, he would ask how else he could be useful and just help people. He repaired the roof, cut the lawn, even washed other people's dishes or walked the dogs. It was impossible to refuse.
What was the worst thing you had to do besides castrate a horse?
There was a house that was, he was going to have his house taken from him, this guy, and he was just not completely there. And he said, "Can you help me clean my house?" And we said yes. And we came in and there was just shit up to your ankles. In almost the entire house. Rats, roaches, all of it. And then he just shoveled shit. Yeah.
Oh my God. What a fucking story.
But it's I believe that, I genuinely believe that there was work ethic, there were certain unknowns that I can't, I don't even know what they were, but.
This period in Reynolds' life turned out to be really difficult. He spent 2 years away from home, where he encountered something he had not seen in his happy childhood. This did not affect Reynolds too positively, but at the same time, he gained invaluable experience, which would later translate into lyrics and music for the band he dreamed of. After returning home, Dan enrolled in a university in Las Vegas and then still managed to get into the same Brigham Young University. This is where the story of Imagine Dragons begins. Back when Dan was in Nebraska and going from house to house, he was already thinking about starting a band. There were no certain plans, but the desire to continue playing music only grew. At Brigham Young University, Dan met Andrew Tolman, who played drums and also dreamed of a band. Other people were found quite quickly, namely guitarist Andrew Beck, bassist Dave Lemke, as well as Aurora Florence, who had violin and keyboard skills. Even then, the band was named Imagine Dragons, and it was under this name that they began to participate in competitions. The name is an anagram, the meaning of which is known only by members of the band itself. About the history of the name and related fan theories, we'll tell a little later. In this lineup, the newly formed band began to hold rehearsals and played several times on small stages with covers of famous songs. Their third performance brought them their first solid win as a student band. It took place at the university competition, Battle of the Bands, and the name perfectly reflected its essence. If this competition was held within the framework of the university and did not promise great prospects, then the next victory strengthened their ambitions and self-confidence. It was also a battle of the bands, but not a university battle, but a city one. This first significant victory brought the band not only the first listeners who began to look for their music, but also straightened their opinion that it is necessary to continue. Having received the first recognition, the Dragons decided not to waste time, and in 2008 recorded their first record on their own. An interesting story is connected with this. At first, the record had no name. The songs were mainly performed at concerts where the records were sold, but in a very limited edition. Perhaps no one would have heard them on record if an old fan had not uploaded them to the internet in 2014. He listened to the band from the beginning and had this CD in his collection. After the release, the fan community gave it the name Speak to Me EP. The fans also made a design, and today this record can be freely listened to on the internet. Reynolds himself does not consider this mini-album part of the discography because now they play in a completely different lineup and completely different music. Early Dragons sounded like this.
Draw a room of flashing lights and let all whispers die. 16 colors, I'm so lonely, let's let the picture dry.
A similar story happened with their next album. In 2017, another fan would publish a record which will contain 5 already known songs, as well as 7 more that no one has heard before. As with the previous record, Reynolds also does not consider it part of the band's discography. All this time, the band was in the town of Provo, where Brigham Young University was located, but Dan understood very well that it would be better for them to move to a big city. For example, in his native Las Vegas, he managed to convince all the members of the band to go with him, but they were also joined by one more person, guitarist Wayne Sermon. Dan met Sermon in one of the clubs when he was playing the guitar. Their acquaintance lasted less than a month, but the men had common interests, ideals, and dreams. So Sermon, almost without thinking, agreed to go with him to Las Vegas. Spoiler alert, he's been in Imagine Dragons ever since.
For sure. And so I dropped everything and I moved to Vegas, and Dan had a brother that managed the Killers. And so he had this idea that it could be a possibility because he saw it happen for the Killers in Las Vegas. And so it's like, well, if they can do it, then I can do it too. And that's just the kind of guy he is too. I think, I've never met anyone as ambitious and driven as that guy.
Wayne Sermon was born on June 15, 1984 in American Fork, Utah. Like Dan Reynolds' parents, his family attended the Mormon church, but Wayne later left that religion. He was on his way to a career as a musician since childhood. He learned to play the cello and guitar at a very young age, and his father's collection of all the Beatles albums only fueled his thirst for music. With age, this passion did not go anywhere, so Sermon entered the Berklee College of Music, where he received a double major, guitar performance and composition. Shortly before meeting Reynolds, Sermon played in a jazz ensemble called the Eclectic Electrics.
I've always been more interested in just creating melodies on the guitar, whether it's just, it felt a little bit more creative to me than regurgitating a lick. And I studied a lot of jazz when I went to college, and so I think that sort of transitioned into my playing when I play rock now is more just playing a little bit more by ear rather than learning a certain lick.
The move to Las Vegas was marked by changes in the lineup. A few months later, Andrew Beck and Aurora Florence left the band. Sermon became the lead guitarist, and Brittany Tolman, wife of drummer Andrew Tolman, took over keyboards. In this lineup, the Dragons wrote new songs, performed in small venues with covers on their own tracks, and in 2009, they came to the show Utah's Got Talent and won another big victory.
hot if I will just open my hands up to the sky and turn to clouds. Whoa.
The victory allowed the new band to perform as an opening act before the performance of singer Kelly Clarkson. Reynolds has said more than once that he's very grateful to Kelly for such a powerful push that started their career.
Yeah.
And we won it, and we got to open for you.
Oh my God, was this a big festival? Kind of thing?
Yeah, it was like an outdoor festival.
Yeah.
And so we got to open for you, and that really kicked off our career in a lot of ways. So I don't think Imagine Dragons actually would be a thing if it weren't for you.
What? Yeah. No.
I'm dead serious. Yeah.
And although everything was going quite well and the circle of listeners was expanding, the band lineup changed again. Due to personal circumstances, bassist David Lemke left the band, and Dan's college friend Ben McKee took his place. Because of this, Ben dropped out of college and moved to Las Vegas. The decision was extremely successful, as he remains in the band today. Ben McKee was born on April 7, 1985 in Forestville, California. As a child, he mastered the acoustic guitar, and in the 5th grade he picked up the bass for the first time and fell in love with it. Throughout high school, Ben continued to master the bass guitar and played in a jazz trio. It was this that influenced his decision to enter the Berklee College of Music, where he met Wayne Sermon and Daniel Platzman, who would also join the band Imagine Dragons. But let's return to the band's story. In the new lineup, Imagine Dragons often performed in the bar The Velour and steadily gathered 15 to 20 spectators. In order to receive at least some money for their music, the Dragons agreed to any job. They took part in all competitions, performed at warm-ups, at birthdays, weddings, as well as in casinos. On weekends, the band could get out to Los Angeles to perform anywhere they weren't kicked out. Once they had to pay $100 to the promoter themselves because not enough people came to the bar and it was not possible to sell all the tickets. Perhaps the Dragons would have traveled from city to city, performing in front of dozens of people if not one day they were not helped by a happy accident. It was their luck, not the musicians who fell ill. In 2009, a big festival called Bite of Las Vegas was held in Las Vegas. One of the headliners of the festival was the band Train, but their lead singer fell seriously ill shortly before the performance. Winning the talent show allowed Imagine Dragons to also perform at that festival, but on a much smaller stage and in front of fewer people. After finishing the performance, the band went to have dinner, but soon they got a call and asked to replace Train. In the evening, more than 20,000 spectators gathered in front of the stage. The Dragons, already used to 100 or 2 fans, took the stage, chanted, and then played as if for the last time. After this performance, the real big story of Imagine Dragons began. It was a great chance, and they took full advantage of it. When Dan realized that a career as a musician is not a distant dream, but a completely achievable reality, he began to think about dropping out of university and devoting himself to music. He didn't like studying too much, especially since his dream of serving in the FBI took a back seat. Dan once had a conversation with his mother, trying to figure out what he should do with his life. Mom asked, quote, "If you had to participate in a shooting, would you be able to shoot a person?" Dan thought about it and realized that he couldn't. Such situations did not happen on stage. So he began to lean more towards music. When Dan focused on his own band, he missed an entire semester of classes. The parents arranged a family meeting and tried to reach their son, but despite the fact that they were quite conservative and still considered music only a hobby, nevertheless, they supported their son's decision, albeit with one condition. He had to do it seriously and devote all his free time to music. In order to have money for the first time, Dan sold the car that his parents once gave him. He lived on this money for several months, did not work, but wrote many songs and created new music. Reynolds got so excited that he missed another semester and had no plans to return to the university. He was quite worried that he was not like his brothers and sisters. They already worked as lawyers in their parents' firm, studied to be doctors, and built a serious but such a boring life. In order to prove himself and those around him that his choice is not just a hobby but a matter of life, Dan and the band started working on a new mini-album. It was released on September 1st, 2009, titled Imagine Dragons. Like previous mini-albums, the release received local popularity and a small number of downloads on the network. This album was still a breakthrough, as you can hear from its sound, but it still won fans. In addition, the song I Need a Minute got on television, specifically in the show on MTV called The Real World San Diego. And although this record did not bring a big breakthrough, it became a good preparation for the following albums. After all, the band lineup was almost completely formed, and the musicians learned to write songs together. In December 2009, the Dragons performed as a warm-up for the Nico Vega band and presented their new songs. This performance was successful not only for the band, but also for Dan himself, as he met his future wife there. This meeting, which resulted in a long marriage, became possible only because Dan's own brother was the manager of the band Nico Vega. He really wanted to help his brother, so he persuaded the organizers to let the Dragons perform as the opening act. Her name was Aja Volkman, and she was the lead singer of the band the Dragons fronted. Interestingly, Aja herself did not see the Dragons' performance because she was busy preparing for her own performance, but their personal communication was established quite quickly. Initially, Dan invited Aja to help him work on some of his unfinished songs, and both enjoyed the process so much that they married in March 2011 and released a joint mini-album called Egyptian a month later. In this way, his brother not only gave Dan the opportunity to perform on another big stage, but also brought him to his future wife. Dan Reynolds and Aja Volkman are raising 3 daughters and a son. It's also interesting that Dan's brother Robert was quite successful in other bands, but did not even think of taking on Imagine Dragons. He believed that Dan was capable of achieving success without his direct help. As we can see, he was right. At that time, although Imagine Dragons were gaining popularity, they did not have their own label, or at least a manager. They continued to write songs that were played at concerts and also released records in small editions. The next mini-album was called Hell and Silence and was released in 2010. The first albums of the Dragons gained their popularity organically and with the help of word of mouth and the internet. Records were passed from hand to hand and from phone to phone. The following was written about the album Hell and Silence. Dan Reynolds sounds like a dude with a bullseye for a heart. With its staccato vocal delivery and huge keys, All Eyes sounds destined for the airwaves, the same of which could be said of the wistful Emma, with its dizzy synth lines and cooed harmonies, and the climactic I Don't Mind, which is powered by ricocheting guitars. A warm review is a rare phenomenon in the history of Imagine Dragons, so this review was especially valuable. Also, the fact that some songs from the album began to get on television gave the band a strong boost. This significantly increased their recognition. They began to be talked about and written about. The song All Eyes sounded in one of the episodes of the series Degrassi: The Next Generation. I Don't Mind was used in promo videos for the 11th season of American Idol, and Hear Me was included in the soundtrack of the film Answers to Nothing. Realizing that success comes naturally, the Dragons almost immediately released another mini-album which became their first major success. The album was called It's Time. It received the status of Best CD of 2011 by Vegas 7 magazine, and the title track It's Time became a local hit. The band believed in the power of this song so much that they included it in the playlist of their next album. The fact was that this song was constantly gaining popularity and at some point became their signature song and their first big hit. As with the previous album, songs from the new record also made it onto television and into commercials, which steadily increased the band's popularity. Considering that they promoted without a label but only on their own, this indicated a considerable success. The main hit was even played in the background of the Apple keynote event presentation and in a National Geographic commercial. Not bad for an indie band, but that was just the beginning. Shortly after the album release, the Dragons changed the lineup again. Now, Andrew and Brittany Tolman have left the band as they wanted to focus more on family life. In the future, the Tolmans would appear at the Dragons concerts playing old songs with them, but in 2011, other people took their place. Dan Platzman, an old friend from college, was now in charge of the drums, and Teresa Flaminio took over the keyboards instead of Brittany. The latter will spend only a few months with the band and will leave it in 2012. But Dan Platzman performs with the band even now. He was born on September 28, 1986 in Atlanta, Georgia. Dan grew up in a family where classical music was respected, so he learned to play violin at the age of 8. At the same age, Dan mastered the drums. Like Sermon and McKee, Dan attended Berklee College but chose an unusual major. He received a degree in music composition for film and very quickly began to receive awards for his work. So, for example, he has the Michael Rendish Award for Outstanding Achievement in Film Scoring, as well as the Vic Firth Grand Prize. Platzman composed the music for the dark comedy thriller Best Friends and the short film Eagles Are Turning People into Horses, the movie. In college, Dan played in jazz bands where he met Sermon and McKee. Platzman came to the band later than anyone else, but he fit in perfectly, and since then the Dragons have not looked for anyone else. When the team was assembled anew, the question of further promotion arose. The Dragons managed to release several more or less successful records, but did not have a full-fledged major album and were not signed to any label. Many people were interested in the band, but the most interested was Alex da Kid, a famous producer from the label Interscope Records. Among his hits, we can mention, for example, the song Love the Way You Lie by Eminem and Rihanna. And yes, this is the same legendary label that released albums by all the big rap and R&B stars from Tupac and Eminem to Madonna and The Police. Listeners, as well as industry insiders, believed that the Dragons were rejecting the services of a label because of some deeply held beliefs. Actually, the Dragons were in search of their own style and sound, so they wanted to find themselves first and then a label. Alex da Kid showed up right on time and made an offer that was hard to refuse. He would go on to produce several of Imagine Dragons' big future hits. Besides, Interscope Records is a real dream for any musician.
A little bit longer. Alex da Kid, he is Grammy-winning, unbelievable producer. The band knew his work with, Eminem and Rihanna. He had a friend, I guess, who played him in Imagine Dragons EP in the car, and he loved the music. There's no more syllables in Lift to See, right? I've been lucky enough to be around some really iconic people, and I see some of the same things that I see in those people in Imagine Dragons. Cool.
Yeah, it's still good.
At first, Alex da Kid did not think about making an album with Dragons. He had other plans. At that time, he was working on a musical about Spider-Man and was looking for artists who could help him with music for the production. Looking ahead, it's worth saying that the production was a complete failure, but the material created for the musical was used in the band's subsequent albums. Once they started working together and wrote a few songs, it became clear that the Dragons were capable of more than music for a failed production, and that they needed a debut album. In the end, it would be Alex da Kid who would reveal the Dragons to the world. The process of working on the album resembled a chemical reaction. Something was suggested by Alex, something by Dan, something was invented together, then we gathered ideas together, wrote songs, and after about 6 months they got the album Night Visions. Before releasing a full-fledged album that would make them superstars, the first experiments and pen tests were released a few months before the album. The album was called Continued Silence and served as a warm-up before the upcoming explosion. It already featured such hits as Radioactive and Demons, and the album was supposed to draw attention to the band. Separately, it's worth mentioning that at this time the band's lineup was finally formed. Dan Reynolds, Ben McKee, Dan Platzman, and Wayne Sermon. The relationship between the band members can be described with a quote about how they write songs. Each member of the band is deeply involved in the songwriting process, contributing to the lyrics and melodies. One complements the other, and that's what Imagine Dragons is all about. The songs typically start with a demo written by one or two members of the band. We'll write literally 100 songs and then eventually bring them all together and figure out which ones resonate the most with the band. Those songs come alive when we start working on the tracks together. The close and friendly relations that were established between the members of the band did not deteriorate over the years. In 2021, they celebrated the band's 10th anniversary, and Dan Reynolds wrote, quote, "Over a decade together and still my best friends. I'm incredibly proud and lucky to be in a band with you." And although the lineup has been updated almost completely from the beginning of its existence to this moment, the name has remained the same. There are many theories about its meaning, but the musicians themselves do not confirm or deny any of them. Dan Reynolds says that the name is an anagram of a phrase that is very important to all members of the band. That is, if we take all the letters in Imagine Dragons and shuffle them in a different way, we will get a new word combination. Options include adorning images, mansion ride gag, a roaming design, groaning medias, insomnia dagger, God is in the manager, morning's aid age, diagnosing mare, ordaining games, and others. On the mini-album Continued Silence, there's a song called On Top of the World, and the video for it contains many anagrams that refer to historical events, films, and people. For example, at 36 seconds, you can see Wayne Sermon in a yellow car with a ragged insomnia sticker hanging on it. Most fans believe that this is the real name of the band, although Dan Reynolds and his colleagues continue to remain silent. If you know something more about this mystery, please leave a comment. Let's try to figure it out together. After preparing and warming up with a mini-album on February 12, 2013, they released the first full-length record called Night Visions. It exceeded all possible expectations. The album debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200 chart and sold over 83,000 copies in its first week. The album has currently sold over 2 million copies worldwide and has been certified platinum in several countries. This album included the well-known hit It's Time, which received a new wave of popularity, as well as 2 completely new but undeniable hits, Radioactive and Demons. Radioactive was one of the first songs the Dragons wrote with Alex, with Reynolds writing the lyrics and melody and Alex the Kid providing the beat. Wayne Sermon's guitar, Ben McKee's bass, and Daniel Platzman's drums were later added. With each new element, the song became more and more strange. When they brought the song to their fledgling team at Interscope, they weren't thrilled and said it would never get radio play. In fact, the single went to number 3 on the Hot 100 and became the band's first single which made it to the top 5. It also brought Imagine Dragons another big win, their first Grammy of their career. The Dragons' second single, Demons, also entered the top 10 despite being written in less than 2 hours. When he and Alex were in the studio, Reynolds would write from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. every day, and at the end, he showed what he was up to. Most of the time, Alex the Kid was very reserved about what he wrote, but when Dan played Demons, Alex realized that this song was really special. When the rest of the band joined in working on the song, a good song quickly turned into a great one, and then into a hit. In support of the album, Imagine Dragons embarked on a grand world tour, which was a resounding success. Already at the very beginning of the tour, the musicians began to create material for the new album, recording demo versions of new songs in between performances. The success was obvious, but everything was mixed for critics. It was often said that the album lacks the depth and adrenaline that the single Radioactive promised. Modern music critics have become much kinder compared to their counterparts of previous decades, especially the 90s and zeros, and yet some artists still get it from them, for example, are today's heroes. Almost every album in the band receives a ton of devastating reviews, and they often call Imagine Dragon the worst band in history. The history of bad reviews and haters who hate everything popular will haunt the band to this day, but Dan Reynolds is philosophical about it. I've seen a music critic look like a school bully, as well as constructive criticism, excellent and appropriate. I think we'll continue to make the music we're making and stay true to ourselves, and whether the rock critics like it or not, I'm not going to spend my life being upset about what other people think. During the tour, which took place throughout North America and parts of Europe, the band continued to write and gather material for the next album. Besides, they continued to write soundtracks for films and did the music for Iron Man 3, The Hunger Games 2, and for the 4th Transformers. The tour lasted almost a whole year, and during this time, they managed to accumulate about 50 demo records, but only a part was used to be on the next record. Like the previous album, this album was written in collaboration with Alex the Kid, but Reynolds himself said that it should be shorter and more hip-hop. The band gave 13 puzzles to fans on social networks. Soon, the puzzle pieces revealed the album's cover and title. There was a set of numbers on the album cover that indicated special coordinates for prizes hidden in the Nevada desert. Among the prizes were autographs, drumsticks, Polaroid cameras, and free passes to all concerts of the tour. When all the mysteries were solved and the band tour was complete, the album Smoke Plus Mirrors was released on February 17, 2015. It debuted at number 1 on the US Billboard 200 chart, selling nearly 200,000 copies in its first week. Recalling the work on this album, Ben McKee says, quote, "With Smoke Plus Mirrors, we knew we were going to be starting at a bigger place and had the opportunity to put more time into crafting production to go with the album, to create a whole world, a whole kind of landscape for this music to live in. We wanted to create something that would really feel like more of an experience to draw the audience in than just the experience of us getting up there and playing the music live." The album showed much more modest results than its predecessor and received much more negative reactions. Rolling Stone magazine gave it 2 stars out of 5 and Billboard magazine just 2.5. And what is your favorite Imagine Dragons album? And why do you think critics are almost always so negative about their new albums? Write in the comments. We will be interested to read them. The huge fame that fell on the band a few years ago was both a gift and a curse. This period seemed difficult for Dan Reynolds, which could be heard on some songs. He suffered from depression and even struggled with thoughts of voluntarily taking his own life. The only thing that saved him was music, but even it could not help completely. This is a complex and sensitive topic, but it is important to mention it. Depression is something that can happen to anyone. We've lost so many wonderful and talented people to this disease, so it's important to have stories about overcoming depression. Reynolds experienced symptoms of depression from an early age, and although he could not accurately define his condition, he felt different and detached from the children who surrounded him. In an interview in 2021, he admitted that it was only in high school that he realized that it was really like depression. For Reynolds, this condition literally meant numbness, not wanting to communicate with people. He lost interest in all his hobbies, except for music. Although he felt indifferent to everything else, music gave him the opportunity to communicate with others and express his emotions in a way that he could not do in conversation. Dan quickly realized that songwriting became a therapeutic experience for him that he would build on for decades.
It was my life. It was all I did since I was 12 when I started to deal with mental health issues. Music was therapeutic for me in a way that nothing else was. I felt like I could communicate in a way that I wasn't able to an adult or to anyone really. Mm-hmm. So I say, that's why I say I feel like it kind of chose me, because I really feel like I didn't have a choice. I felt like music was just, if I was going to stay alive, I was going to do music. Yeah. And I genuinely feel like music saved my life.
Reynolds' experience is not unique. In Utah, the state with the largest Mormon population, euthanasia is the most common type of death for residents between the ages of 10 and 24. Compared to the national average, the rate of this type of death is increasing 4 times faster in Utah. Family and religious pressures, combined with a lack of mental health awareness, create an environment in which depression can thrive. Creating Imagine Dragons gave Reynolds a purpose, and 6-hour gigs on the Las Vegas Strip for little pay honed their craft. They did not have time to blink an eye when they released a hit album. Recently married and having just had a baby, he should be on top of the world, but as he toured the world and performed to sold-out audiences, his depression returned. During the flight, which was accompanied by severe turbulence, Reynolds thought, quote, "God, if I die right now, I don't care." It was this thought that prompted him to seek professional help. He began seeing a therapist, being the first in his family to do so. Now, years later, he says that decision has changed his life. Instead of simply enduring the ups and downs in his life, Reynolds faced them face to face for the first time, allowing him to emerge victorious from this fight. Although mental illness has long been stigmatized, cases of depression in celebrities also have a positive side. By sharing their stories with people, celebrities, from Jon Hamm to Lady Gaga, are sending fans an important message. They're not alone. Reynolds is not one to keep his victory over depression to himself. Now, the singer sees his mission as spreading the word about mental health, especially among conservative communities where such conditions are considered a weakness. In an interview, Reynolds told what helped him the most in his recovery. Quote, "If I was going to survive, I was going to do music. The message is clear. Hold on to your passions and interests, and they will keep you afloat." At a 2018 concert, Reynolds stopped the band mid-song to give a small speech about the value of therapy.
Music saved me. Music saved me. When I was a lonely and confused kid, I turned to music and I found peace. To those of you who struggle with depression and anxiety, I'm here with you. Keep going. Keep living. Keep waking every single day. There is light. You'll go on to do all the things you want in the world. You're not broken. It's part of your story. It's what makes you unique. It makes you raw. It makes you authentic. It makes you emotional. I see gray for long periods of time. I get numb. I want to be away from people quite often. But then there's moments that I break through the clouds and I see the beauty of the world. That's the real life of depression. So if you know someone who has it, put your arms around them. Love them. Hold them tight. Support them. We bully, we hate, we write vicious words online. We must love, we must accept. It's a simple concept.
The rapid rise in popularity was difficult for other band members as well, but there was also a positive side to this process. This brought the musicians even closer. Quote, "We are 100% family." McKee says, quote, "We are, I think, closer to each other at this point than we are with our families. I mean, we've been through everything together, and we are the only people who can relate to the bizarre way that our life is. People don't really understand going on tour and what it's like to have our band explode and just be in the middle of that experience. We know where we're coming from, and we also, every step of the way, we've made these decisions together. We've created this music together. We're out there every night performing together. We're brothers, we're teammates, we're best friends. We're all of that." After the big tour, the band took a break during which Dan concentrated on therapy and his family. This kind of vacation helped Dan cope with problems and understand what he wants from life. He's gotten much better, and it really shows on the new album, which came out after a therapeutic break. It was called Evolve and was released on June 23, 2017. The album debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200 and sold 100,000 copies in its first week. Despite the fact that in commercial terms it was somewhat inferior to the first album, it was ahead of the previous one, and in general it performed well. In addition, the record had several gold hits, which brought the band many awards. For example, the songs Believer and Thunder became big hits at the level of Radioactive and even surpassed it in terms of popularity and views. Believer marked the beginning of Reynolds' collaboration with Swedish songwriter-producer duo Mattman and Robin. Acclaimed hit writer Justin Tranter was also involved in the work, who, according to Reynolds, helped get the band back on track. They produced the previous albums themselves and could not always stop time, adding new sounds and ideas to the songs. When working on Evolve, the band followed a minimalist approach and wrote songs quickly. Dan says this about Believer: "It's one of those songs that's just waiting to be written." The song spent 29 weeks at the top of the Hot Rock and Alternative chart, the longest to date. Additionally, Believer is the only song in the band's catalog to have more than 2 billion streams on Spotify and 2 billion views on YouTube. As for another big hit called Thunder, it was awarded a Diamond certificate and was also nominated for a Grammy. The song was recorded on Dan's home computer, and with good headphones, you can even hear his kids screaming in the background. There was nothing professional about it. It wasn't in the studio. It's not recorded in a vocal booth. I recorded it in one night, sent it to Alex, and he said, "I like it. Let's record it with the band." According to Reynolds himself, the song is about the double standards that society is infected with. Dan sings about growing up being told what to do and not being able to follow his dreams. In the second verse, the singer says that he overcame everyone who told him what to do, fulfilled his dream, and still performed on stage.
Smiling from the stage while you were clapping in the nosebleeds.
The album was nominated for a Grammy and won Best Rock Album at the Billboard Music Awards. It was a truly grandiose comeback, although critics were traditionally mixed. Fortunately, Dragons are one of those bands that have never looked back at negative reviews but focused on their own vision, as well as feedback from fans. By the way, their fans call themselves fire breathers. After a successful release and a big tour, which also lasted almost a year, Dragons decided to release another album. During the recording of Evolve, they accumulated enough material to release from time to time, but they decided to release it all at once under one name. The album was called Origins and was released on November 9th, 2018. It debuted at number 2 on the US Billboard 200 with 91,000 copies sold. The first single was chosen to be a song written a few years ago, but then Dan decided to save it for the future. Living in a dog-eat-dog world can bring out the worst in you, and sometimes the best. It would be a lie to tell you I haven't become somewhat skeptical about some things in the last decade of my life. However, I believe that when you truly learn to love yourself, the judging eyes and hateful words become meaningless.
Standing on the edge, face up, 'cause you're a natural. I'm beating harder.
And although the album can boast of a big hit and just good songs, this time critics were even more skeptical. The Dragons have been accused of trying to fit into all kinds of playlists just to maintain their popularity. It's not known exactly, but perhaps similar reviews influenced the fact that in 2019 the band took a break from music, which continued for almost 2 years. Dan and his colleagues decided it was time to take a break and focus on their own families. For this reason, the Dragons even sacrificed a concert tour so that everyone could spend more time with their relatives. At that moment, Dan Reynolds had already been married for 7 years, but the relationship began to fall apart, and he and his wife almost broke up. Despite the fact that at the time they managed to save their marriage, a few years later the couple would still divorce. Among other reasons for the creative pause is Dan's Bechterew disease. He suffers from chronic pain in the spine, joints, and ligaments. According to him, a special diet, physical exercises, and yoga help him fight the disease. Concert activities do not improve Reynolds' condition, but regular exercise does. Before moving on to the latest albums and another topic, we would like to ask you to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell. We try to make long and informative videos about good artists, so we would like to have your feedback. Thank you, and let's continue. Despite the fact that the band members devote all their time to the team, they also do not forget about their personal lives and side projects. So we already mentioned that Reynolds has a mini album recorded together with his wife. Dan Platzman, who not only plays drums but also sings, launched a solo project under his own name in 2023. He not only wrote the music and lyrics but also directed the music video himself.
time's not wasted.
Wayne Sermon and Ben McKee still feel comfortable within the band and have not created side projects. Wayne writes many songs because he suffers from chronic insomnia. He spends such days in the studio or at home at the computer, so he's accumulated enough material for future albums. From time to time, Wayne collaborates as a guitarist with famous artists because it is impossible not to notice his talent. So, for example, he has experience working with such artists as Kendrick Lamar, X-Ambassadors, and Kygo. So, having rested, the band returned in 2021, and not empty-handed, but with the announcement of a new album. Or rather, even two. The new record was divided into two parts and was named Mercury Act 1 and Mercury Act 2. We've been planning to take a break in 2019, but then the world went crazy and it became a much longer period off the road than we'd ever imagined. Wayne Sermon explains, quote, "We'd been recording almost non-stop though, so we had tons and tons of music. Over 200 demos. We recorded both albums at the same time, but it seemed to make sense to release the records in two parts. The album's title is derived from the word mercurial, a direct reference to Reynolds' mental health issues, as well as the fact that the band never had a specific genre. Producer Rick Rubin was involved in the recording. He distinguished himself not only by producing, but also by forcing Reynolds to use less metaphors in the music and to write directly. Rick was incredibly influential in so many ways. A lot of the work happened outside of the music. It happened in long conversations about life. He taught me to embrace vulnerability and not shy away from who I am, to stop guarding myself and to let go." By the way, critics often mention the excessive metaphorical nature of Reynolds' texts. But as we remember, this technique dates back to childhood when he had to hide his own thoughts behind allegories. In this album, Reynolds' lyrics touch on the themes of loss and loneliness, but at the same time, they celebrate life. The point of art is to share our darkest moments as well as the light ones. I believe that by singing about my own struggle with it, it hopefully will bring someone else some sort of peace or resolve. This record deals with a lot of searching and loneliness, struggling with the finite state of reality. One of the singles released shortly before the album release was the song Wrecked. The song is dedicated to Reynolds' brother's wife, Alicia, who died of cancer. Along with his brother, he was with her in her last days and was there when she died. It was the first time in Reynolds' life that he witnessed death. Dan described the song as a way to deal with it all, as music has always been his refuge. No longer a man of fervent faith, he can only hope that she hears it somewhere in a place where she feels good and no longer in pain. This song is his wish for eternity with those he loves. The first act was released on September 3rd, 2021, and almost immediately it was announced that the second part would be released soon. In support of the first act, the Dragons embarked on a major tour and released the first single from the second act in March 2022. It became the song Bones, and it's an attempt to write a fun song about death. Not the easiest task, but it seems they succeeded. When the Dragons played the song in concert, everyone dances. To date, this is the last album in the band's discography, but in 2022 they released the 10-year anniversary edition of the first album, Night Visions. In 2024, it became known that the Dragons are writing a new 7th studio album and have already released the first single called Eyes Closed. The single was accompanied by lyrics that, again, raise the issue of mental health. Reynolds claims to have been writing almost a song a day for the last several decades. Thousands of songs, most of which will never be heard, but which helped him feel alive. When you work every day at something tirelessly and put in the time, it will become a part of you, and it will help bring light to the dark. This song is about exactly that. Stay alive.
Lock me up in the maze. Turn out the lights.
Some people believe that art should be outside of politics, but Imagine Dragons are not one of them. Throughout their careers, they openly and consistently opposed any discrimination and cooperated with charitable foundations. They also opened their own. Back in 2013, the band founded the Tyler Robinson Foundation to help children with cancer in honor of a fan who died of cancer, Tyler Robinson. Every year, the band holds charity gala concerts to raise money for this fund. Ben McKee invented an interesting way to do good deeds. In 2021, he started his day by sending $1,000 to various charities. He would start his day by reading the news, come across a problem, and then look for a foundation that dealt with solving that particular problem. He tweeted daily about donations, inspiring his fans to do the same. In 2015, Reynolds visited a refugee camp in Germany where he met with people fleeing war-torn homes across Europe and the Middle East. His experience inspired Imagine Dragons to create the Number 14 campaign, a global action in support of refugees in Europe and the Middle East. To kick off the campaign, the band released a song called I Was Me, donating all proceeds from iTunes sales to the refugee crisis. For this, the Dragons received a flurry of criticism on the internet saying that they would be better off focusing on the problems of the United States. But no criticism could turn Reynolds and the band away from charity work. In his opinion, music can save lives because that is exactly what it once did for him. Dan Reynolds grew up in a deeply religious and conservative family, but from childhood he did not share the views of his environment too much. In 2021, Reynolds donated his childhood home worth $1 million to be used as an LGBT youth center. This was done as part of the $8 million 8 Houses campaign. These centers were created so that teenagers experiencing depression could find shelter and receive psychological help in time. Imagine Dragons donate their time and money to various causes, and one of them is especially close to the heart of frontman Dan Reynolds, the annual music festival Love Loud. All proceeds from it go to the fund, which supports various local and national charities. His motivation lies in his upbringing. I saw firsthand my friends go through really difficult periods in their life where they were trying to navigate faith in their home that went against who they were as a human and their gender and their choice of who they are, who they love, and who they wish to be. But still, songwriting remains Reynolds' favorite way to communicate with people. In 2022, the band partnered with the Crisis Helpline to create the song I Don't Like Myself, which aims to encourage listeners to seek help when they need it.
There are times when I don't like myself.
The band's anti-war position is also known. In 2022, after the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Dragons performed in Poland, and Reynolds addressed the Ukrainians with a moving speech.
To the beautiful people of Ukraine, so many have lost their lives needlessly. Is it 2022? Why is there still war? Why are there children dying? Why can we not do something more than sing a song? I feel helpless. I feel hopeless. But here we are tonight. I know that there are so many who have lost their homes who are here tonight. I have read your letters. I have read your words. I know that you are here. This song is for you. May your families be safe. May this war end. May there be peace. May our children live to see another day. May they have a bright future. This song is for Ukraine.
But the band members did not limit themselves to words and filmed a music video in Ukraine about the life of a child whose home was destroyed by Russian troops. The video for the song, Crushed, tells the story of 14-year-old Sasha. In this way, they not only drew the world's attention to the war in Ukraine, but also raised funds for the reconstruction of the country. After all, Sasha's story is the story of many thousands of children crippled by the Russian invasion.
I suppose she's supposed to be.
The clip was shot by a director named Ty Arnold. Since the beginning of the war, he's been in Ukraine documenting Russian crimes and transporting humanitarian aid. He met Sasha on the street when he was wandering through the broken village, which was completely destroyed. Imagine Dragons is not just a popular band. These are people with big hearts who understood a long time ago that music can not only comfort, it can heal and inspire great deeds. Their popularity causes hatred in some and admiration in others. Fortunately, there are more of the latter. Dan Reynolds made this band as we know it to be because he was obsessed with what he did. No one promised that everything would work out, but he left the usual environment, rejected the imposed rules, and turned away from everything to do music. We think he succeeded. If you like this video, you can find other interesting stories about great musicians on our channel. We try to unearth quality and rare information about the lives of those we admire, so click on the video that appeared on your screen. And a huge thank you for watching until the end. You were watching the Enco Stories channel. See you very soon.